Are you ready to take control? This is the IssuesWatch podcast. Hello and welcome to the IssuesWatch podcast. I'm Brad Muniz, your host for the bi-weekly accounting and auditing episodes. I'm an assurance principal at Clifton Larson Allen. And back with me today is Matt Charney, audit director at CLA. Welcome back, Matt.
Thank you for having me again, Brad. It's good to be here.
Wow, I didn't mean come back last time, but I guess you accepted that as an invite.
It was just so much fun. I had to come back.
All right. This episode qualifies for Nano CPE credit. If you're interested in earning CPE credit for this episode, hit the pause button now and head over to njcpa.org/nano to find out how. Quick disclaimer, the views and statement expressed herein are our own and not necessarily those of NJCPA or CLA. Okay, so we have a different topic today. Usually we go over a lot of news and, what's come out lately that people need to be aware of, but sometimes we'll come up with a topic where we think that people are just not addressing properly.
Right.
Now, coincidentally, I do a lot of second reviews and review of work papers in general, as you do too.
Mm-hmm.
But I see, especially when I do peer reviews too, I'll give you some examples of peer reviews I've seen later on.
Yeah.
But one of the things I've seen an issue with, and you happen to do a session in the office on, is the control environment. And not as much document the full control environment, but the control environment, key controls, and walkthroughs.
Right. Exactly.
People don't know what they're doing, especially when some of the peer reviews I've looked at.
I'll give him some credit because it is a tough topic.
Okay, he's a nice guy.
I try. And I've noticed that a lot of teams kind of push this off until the end of the audit, which is really not the purpose of this stuff. It is a planning procedure. We're supposed to do it during the planning phase. I know planning seasons happen for different teams at different times, but if you're about to issue a report and you kind of kick yourself and you say, oh man, we didn't sign off on the walkthroughs yet. We didn't even do the walkthroughs yet. That's usually a bad sign. So we were hoping to shed some color on this, maybe make it a little bit easier. I know you said you had some examples about things that maybe we're seeing that we could probably fix around and improve upon in the future.
You said something really important.
Yeah.
This is part of the planning stage.
Correct.
This is part of your risk assessment process.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not doing it, then theoretically your job's not planned properly. Mm-hmm. And I've seen it where I've gone into peer reviews, A, it hasn't even been done, and as you said, B, it's done at the end of the job. And unfortunately, we're in the age of electronic work papers now, so I can see the date the work papers are saved.
Oh yeah, there's no cheating.
No, no.
Yeah, but I'm glad you brought that up because I can, and I've seen inspectors will do this, and peer reviews as well have failed audits for not going through this section properly because they said, well, if you don't know the full understanding of your client's internal control process, how can you say your risk assessment is complete? And at that point, the entire audit is a failure. It doesn't matter how great your testing is, how perfect the report is, they don't care.
Right, right. So what do you have? What are you thinking?
Yes, so I like to start off with definitions because a lot of this stuff, there's a lot of terms that we throw around. We used a bunch already, walkthroughs, narrative, control, key control. What does all that stuff mean? And I feel like a lot of it can get interchanged, but at the end of the day, the process narrative is the business process and the flow of information start to finish and all the roles and responsibilities that go into that. Now, the key control or the control itself is actually different from the narrative. They're not the same thing. And I think if you're starting off in this area, or this is where a lot of teams make mistakes, is that they intertwine these two. The control itself is something that prevents or detects a misstatement. That is a very different thing from a narrative because a narrative can be a very simple task. I'm gonna put my pen down, and then that's the narrative, right? That's my process. A very simple example.
Right.
The control would be, Brad's gonna look at the pen and say, that pen's horizontal. It's supposed to be vertical.
Well, how do I know that you put the pen down? Did I review it and make sure that you put the pen down?
And that's the key word right there, review. If nobody's reviewing anything, then it's not a control. And that's something that I wanna stress because that's how we make sure that we're testing actual controls and not just looking at a narrative.
So you're saying that if nobody's reviewing it, that's the problem. That sounds like the key control.
Exactly. And if you have a significant risk in your audit, your control can very easily be elevated into a key control. Right. And those are the ones that we're going to want to do walkthroughs on. And now a walkthrough is different from a narrative and a control because the walkthrough is the actual procedure that the auditor should be doing. Now, I don't want to mince words here. We're not testing internal controls, right? That's a totally different thing.
You may have to, but we're not talking about that right now.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, a walkthrough is almost a mini test of controls. We're going to take a sample of one, so to speak. And there are 3 procedures that we can do in order to get good assurance around those walkthroughs. And so that can be an observation, an inspection, or a reperformance, right? An observation being, I'm going to watch Brad say something about the fact that the pen is vertical, it's supposed to be vertical. Great.
Right.
We observed you performing the control. Everything is working the way that we intended to be. It's designed properly. It's implemented properly. And those are the key 2 terms that you're going to want to make sure that you're checking to make sure that the control is operating properly in order to make sure that you don't have any deficiencies or things like that. And we'll get to that in a second. The next I said was an inspection. Maybe you get some kind of piece of paper, you get a schedule that they're creating, you get an invoice, making sure that it's stamped, that it was approved, something like that. Anything physical that you can inspect in order to make sure that the control is operating properly. Last is reperformance. Say you have stock options, I know, God forbid, in your audit. And the control, not the process, the control is that the controller or the CFO, whoever it may be, goes through their stock options that they issued for the quarter and says, I'm going to do a Black-Scholes calculation, and I'm going to put all the inputs in my Black-Scholes calculator, and I'll get a price. And that becomes the value that you would then record your options at. Now, it's tough to test that kind of control, walk through that type of control, because there's not a lot of evidence to grab onto there. Maybe if you're lucky and you know about it during the middle of the year, you could observe that. But say you show up, it's February, the year's already over, it's a calendar year end, and the year is over. Well, now you can say, well, how about I just reperform what you did? Give me all the inputs that you did. Give me the Black-Scholes calculator that you used. If you get the same number, the control has been reperformed. You did the same thing. What's
interesting is I want to regroup on this. I want to go back to the narrative, all the way back. Let's start over again. Hey,
sure.
Welcome, take control. Now, the narrative sounds to me like a story.
Yes.
Yeah. Janie goes to the post office. Frank goes to the mail room. It sounds like a story. Whereas the control is to make sure that, has anybody made sure that they are doing what they're supposed to be doing?
Right.
That's the whole element, to make sure that the financial reporting is proper, because there is a control and somebody is performing that control.
Exactly. And if you're going through the narratives or even the process with your clients, maybe they don't have something documented. I know a lot of clients may not have great records about this stuff. You know, just have the conversation and say, how do you go from A to B? How do you initiate a transaction? How do you make sure the transaction is correct? How do you know whatever you're doing is right? Who's taking a look at this? Are you preventing or detecting anything that could go wrong? And you just have to ask those simple questions, and right off the bat, those controls will reveal themselves. Even if they're not written down, clients are probably doing them without even realizing it. Just because they don't call it a control doesn't mean they aren't checking things. Everybody wants to run their business the right way.
Right. Even the smallest company has controls.
Absolutely.
Because unless the owner's completely absent and the bookkeeper's doing everything and nobody's watching anything, but every company that I've worked with, for the most part, there is some element of controls. They might not be the best controls, but there is some. Now, the other thing is, I know you're not going to go into this, but I just wanted, you don't have to go deep into it.
Yeah.
The controls have to be addressing the assertion that you're focusing on, too.
Correct. Yes.
Because I looked at somebody else's job recently, and they said for sales, somebody reviews the invoices. Aha! There's a control.
Right.
Then in their description, they talked about the third-party software, how the invoices are generated. That's a narrative.
Sounds like a process to me.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then for the walkthrough, they said that the third-party software, let's stick with that whole thing, and that they reviewed their confirmations.
Interesting.
Their AR confirms.
Right, right.
So I don't see the connection of anything here on how we had a key control documented. The description did not address that key control at all, and then the walkthrough, the procedure, one of your 3 procedures, did not sound like it applied.
Yeah, I would tend to agree there, Brad. And this is a common mistake that we see with a lot of this. The substantive test should be a separate procedure in your audit than your walkthrough. There might be rare cases where these 2 things cross over, but the substantive test is testing the assertion of your FSA, right? We get confirms to check the existence of receivables. But if the process is reviewing the invoice to make sure that the sale was enacted correctly, then the walkthrough should be checking whatever that person is reviewing or doing an inspection. We can get an invoice, make sure it's signed, stamped, whatever it may be that management is doing in order to make sure that the invoice was correct in order to approve it for sale.
Yeah, now, one of us old people talk about dual purpose testing. What we mean by dual purpose testing is one of the invoices that you looked at for accounts receivable or for revenue might be one of the invoices you use for your walkthrough.
Right.
Okay? Some people get particular about that, but you can use that for the purpose. Now, difficult thing is, again, this is supposed to be done in planning.
Yep.
Substantive work is done after.
Yeah.
How are you doing this dual?
Exactly. You wouldn't in a perfect world, you wouldn't have your substantive support at the time that you're doing your walkthroughs. But yes, you could use both as long as you're acknowledging this invoice shows evidence of my control and then shows evidence for my substantive test. It's the same piece of paper, but we're testing for two different things. I want to make that very clear.
Yep. So, looking at the time, I know we have a lot more we can go into here.
Right.
I mean, we've got material weaknesses, significant deficiencies, then we've got IT stuff. I think we're going to have to make a little bit of a series out of this.
This works for me. Happy to
All
come
right.
back.
Okay, super. To learn more about internal controls, check out these upcoming events. Learn about the role of internal control in risk-based audit on February 10th or March 6th. Don't get caught with your socks down in a 1-hour webinar on February 19th or February 24th. And the 2-hour webinar, Fraud Busters. Controls to prevent and detect fraud is on March 3rd and April 30th. Get info on these events and more at njcpa.org/events. And of course, be sure to join the Society's Accounting and Auditing Standards Interest Group. Sign up for free at njcpa.org/groups. Matt, thanks again for coming and presenting on this. I know that we're going to see you again, if not on this, on other topics.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And since we're going to have you around more with Frank, we're going to have to compare notes and we'll have to compare the size of arms, okay?
Exactly. We'll do
him too.
wingspan measurements.
Thanks for watching or listening.